Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining our briefing today. Welcome to Flight Day 13 of the Artemis 1 mission, now halfway into this 25-and-a-half-day mission. Another milestone reached today as Orion reached its maximum distance from the Earth. And to tell us a little bit about the systems on the spacecraft and how the mission is going so far, we have a panel of briefers joining us from NASA headquarters. We have NASA Administrator Bill Nelson. And here at Johnson Space Center, I'm joined in the room by Mike Serafin, Artemis 1 Mission Manager, Rick LeBrode, Artemis 1 Flight Director, Howard Hugh, Orion Program Manager, and Vanessa Weich, Center Director at Johnson Space Center. Again, thanks for joining us. We have some media here in the room as well as on the phone. Ahead of taking questions today, just a reminder, you can press *1 to raise your hand in the phone to ask a question, and press *2 to lower your hand if your question has been answered. But before we get to those, we're going to turn it over to NASA Administrator Bill Nelson for some opening remarks.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Well, the NASA teams have been very busy over this holiday weekend because of the unbelievable can-do spirit. Artemis 1 has had extraordinary success and has completed a series of history-making events. So, for example, on Friday, for the first time, a human-rated spacecraft successfully entered that orbit for Artemis 1 called the distant retrograde orbit. And then on Saturday, Orion surpassed the distance record for a mission with a spacecraft designed to carry humans into deep space. And that record before had been set by Apollo 13 at about 248,000 miles from Earth. And just over an hour ago, Orion set another record, clocking its maximum distance from Earth, 270,000 miles. And of course, Artemis builds on Apollo. Not only are we going farther and coming home faster, but Artemis is paving the way to live and work in deep space in a hostile environment, to invent, to create, and ultimately to go on with humans to Mars. Now, since the launch, we have been receiving critical data back, and there's a lot more to come. For example, many of us know Arturo Campos was a NASA engineer who developed a plan to bring the crippled Apollo 13 crew home safely. For a mission that something terribly went wrong, it's looked in the annals of NASA as one of the most successful missions because they saved the crew. Well, on the spacecraft now, Orion, is Commander Munican Campos' namesake, his namesake aboard Orion. And this is a somewhat what we would call a mannequin, a Munican. He's outfitted with sensors to provide data on what crew members might experience in flight. And that data will continue Campos' legacy of enabling human exploration in deep space. Of course, we've said from the beginning, since this is a test flight, the biggest test after the launch is the reentry, because we want to know that that heat shield works at about 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, almost half as hot as the sun, coming in at 32 Mach. It's going to hit the atmosphere at about 200,000, at the ultimate entry point, and then it's going to dip down about 200,000 feet into the upper atmosphere at that 25,000 miles an hour. And then it's going to pull up and it's going to bleed off some of that speed to about Mach 22, 17,000 miles an hour. We've already learned a lot. And this team's resilience is just unbelievable. And it's incredible how smoothly the mission's gone. But it is a test. And that's what we do. We stress it and we test it. And when Orion comes home on the 11th of December, splashing down in a couple of weeks, we look forward to learning what all those sensors will have told us in order to be able to put 4 human beings on the top of Artemis 2. And then we're going to the moon, into lunar orbit in preparation for Artemis 3, where we will have 4 go into a lunar polar elliptical orbit that will then have 2 of the astronauts in the lander go down to the surface. That will be the first woman and the next man. So let me turn it over to Vanessa Weiss. Vanessa is our great director out there at the Johnson Space Center. Hey, Vanessa, take it away.
Okay, well, thank you, Administrator Nelson. And I believe we have a video that we're going to play, so we're going to play that video first.
5, 4-stage engine start. 3, 2, 1. Boosters ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
Wow. So go Orion. You know, this mission is just the success of many women and men from all across NASA. And then for Orion itself, Lockheed Martin and the flight control team. It's just a wonderful opportunity that I have. I've gone over to the control center and had an opportunity to talk with many of the members of the flight control team, people in the support rooms, back rooms, and thank them for their work. But now is a chance for me to publicly say thank you to each of them for all of the hard work that they've put into this mission. I also want to thank Howard Hugh as the program manager. I want to thank Rick LeBrode as the lead flight director, and I want to thank Mike Serafin as the mission manager. The mission is just going completely flawless. Of course, we're learning. There's things that we have to figure out about the systems themselves, but Orion is just performing so very well. This is a chance for us to talk about the fact that with Orion today, being a spacecraft that is in lunar orbit, we also have a spacecraft, the International Space Station, that's in LEO. So right now, our teams are controlling 2 spacecraft. And it's just amazing, the accomplishments that we've had, and many more to come. But with the Artemis program, as the administrator said, right here at NASA's Johnson Space Center, we're just super proud of the Orion. We're also working on the Gateway, which will be a platform in the lunar vicinity. We're building new suits. We're building rovers. We're working with the Marshall Space Flight Center on the lander. All of that so that we can continue to explore with our astronauts going into space. This mission is just a great success. It's the beginning. It will allow us to do Artemis 2, where we will put our astronauts on board. The tests that are going on today, you're going to hear the mission management team, because Orion is performing so well, They are adding new test objectives to the mission, so that's a great thing. That lets you know that right now we're learning about this vehicle and preparing for going forward into the future. I did also just want to share that, right now we have spent this past weekend celebrating Thanksgiving, and our flight control teams did get an opportunity to celebrate Thanksgiving. And just want to say again, thank you to all of the people that are making this possible. It takes many, many people all around the world to make this happen. And with that, I just want to say thank you to each and every one of you. You're doing a great job, gentlemen.
Thank you, Vanessa. And for additional opening remarks, we'll turn it over to Artemis Mission Manager Mike Seraphin.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for those kind words, Administrator Nelson and Vanessa. Welcome to Flight Day 13 of our 26-day marathon. As Vanessa mentioned, we are looking at adding additional objectives, and the halfway point in this mission allows us and affords us an opportunity to step back and look at what our margins are and where we could be a little smarter to buy down risk and understand the spacecraft's performance for crewed flight on the very next mission. So this halfway point teaches us to number our days so that we can get a heart of wisdom. And adding 7 new objectives above the baseline that we agreed on to further characterize the thermal environment, but also the propulsion system, allows us to again get smarter for crewed flight. In terms of mission status, we are continuing to proceed along the nominal mission, and we passed the halfway point in terms of distance from Earth. We passed the halfway point in terms of time in the mission plan. And in terms of mission objectives, if you look back at Priority 1, which is demonstrate the vehicle at lunar reentry conditions, we bought down half of that on launch day by the rocket delivering us, the Space Launch System rocket delivering us to the point of translunar injection and setting up the initial conditions. We will not realize the second half of Priority 1 until entry, descent, and landing day, as Administrator Nelson described in his opening comments. In terms of priorities 2 and 4, we are 25% complete, so we've got 31 of the 124 baseline objectives complete. We have 37.5% of those objectives in progress, or 46 of the 124, and then 37.5% yet to be started. A lot of those are essentially tied to entry, descent, landing in the post-splashdown time frame. So adding the 7, what we're calling real-time objectives, adds above and beyond that 124 objective content in terms of priorities 2 and 4. And then priority 3, retrieving the spacecraft, we will again achieve that on entry and splashdown and recovery day. We are starting our initial preparations for deployment of the recovery forces out at Naval Base San Diego. Our Exploration Ground Systems-led recovery operations team in the U.S. Navy have begun their preparations for what they call just-in-time training. And they are going to deploy tomorrow for that training and then come back to shore and then set up for recovery. In terms of the mission management team, we did meet, since the last time I was here to talk to you, we did meet on Tuesday, November the 22nd. It was a non-decisional meeting, 45 minutes, and we just largely statused the progress of the mission. We also met on Wednesday, November the 23rd. Again, that was largely a non-decisional meeting. We did go through the imagery findings to date, and we did discuss those, and there were no imagery findings of consequence through our integrated imagery team. And then the mission management team was off Thursday, November the 24th through Sunday, the 27th, largely because the mission is proceeding so well. And none of the anomalies or funnies that are out there are of consequence. We did meet today for 2 hours. It was a decisional meeting. We did close one of our anomaly resolution teams associated with the star trackers and the random access memory built-in test hardware that we're seeing a number of funnies on, and we essentially concluded that the hardware is performing as expected, and this is really just a byproduct of the flight environment. And then we did approve 2 flight rule waivers associated with setting up for the additional flight test objectives, and those will enable us to set up the initial conditions for that. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Leah.
Thanks, Mike. And I will pass it over to Rick LeBrode, Artemis 1 Flight Director.
All right, thank you very much. I can't tell you what a pleasure it is to be here to give you a status on how well things are going. It's always a lot easier when things are going so well. I think I want to start with I have a graphic that shows that you've seen before. It's the mission trajectory. So if you could put that up, please. It's pretty straightforward. We're halfway in the mission, so you figure we're halfway through the DRO. So I don't know if we got that. Okay. There we go. And if you look at number 11, which is essentially, like I said, halfway into the DRO, that's where Orion's located right now. The imagery was crazy. You saw that the imagery and that opening videos clip, and I can tell you, I was in the control center at the console for a majority of those images, the ones that include the Earth and the Moon, and it's really hard to articulate what the feeling is. It's just amazing to be here and seeing that. So it's certainly a pleasure. So I'll just give you kind of a status on where we are. Mike talked a little bit about, we're just clicking off our detailed flight test objectives. Everything's going extremely well. Going so well that we're working with Howard and his team, the engineering team, and the European partners to add more test objectives. If you recall, if you supported the pre-mission briefing, I talked about, the simple question was, why are we flying the flight, or what do we want to try and accomplish? And up to this mission, everything was just test data. So a lot of our models that the engineering team uses for their analysis, they're using just data, figures and test information. Well, the effort that we're doing now to get this real-time performance data from the vehicle and the environment is that valuable data that's going to be put into the test, update the models to allow us to know exactly how this vehicle is going to operate, and it'll relieve us of a lot of our constraints. A lot of these objectives are going to be, the thermal environment. Try to expand the thermal environment. Right now we're constrained to we can get out of the tail to sun attitude for upwards of 3 hours, but when we come back, we have to wait 10 hours before we can do another excursion. So we're hoping to get more information, get smarter on how the vehicle thermally responds to give us more flexibility, and that'll be directly beneficial to the future Artemis missions when we're flying the crew. Let's see, for the mission to complete the trajectory, we had planned for 19 translational burns. Up to this point, we've done 9, and we've used every one of Orion's propulsion systems. We've done 3 larger burns greater than 100 feet per second using the orbital maneuvering system, the OMS engine. We've done 3 using the +X, or you'll hear them called as auxiliary thrusters. And those 3 were on the order of less than 9 feet per second. And then we did 3 also using the reaction control system, RCS system, and those were all less than 1 foot per second. And we did 2 of those burns where we actually maneuvered into attitude, the specific attitude, and thrust in a specific direction. And the last one we did was, it was a very small burn, but we did it multi-axis, where you don't even have to maneuver to the attitude. So it was a great test of Orion propulsion capabilities. We were going to do a burn today. We call these orbit maintenance burns, but it was a very small burn. We opted not to do it, and a part of the reason also is because when we do our next orbit maintenance number 3, which is in a couple days, we want to. This is one of those test objectives that we're adding, and we want to burn the +X. The auxiliary thrusters for 100 seconds. A lot of that's going to be testing the thrusters themselves. They're rated for much longer than that, but we haven't used it yet for those kind of durations. So we're going to do that, but we're also going to test. I think we want to test some of the pluming on the solar arrays during that time frame as well. So let's see. The upcoming. Just to give you a little highlight on what's coming up. We'll depart the distant retrograde orbit on Thursday, start heading back towards the moon. And then when we have the return powered flyby, that'll be on flight day 20. And that again, when we fly by the moon, will be 80 miles off the surface. So we should expect to get some more spectacular imagery of the moon as we fly by. So I think that's all I have to report at this point. So I'll hand it back to you. Yeah.
Thanks, Rick. All good things. And I will turn it over to Howard Hugh, Orion Program Manager.
Thanks, Leah. Let's see. I'll start with thanking Administrator Nelson and Senator Director Weish for recognizing the team. Certainly, it's very tough working during the holiday and missing some time with the family and friends, but the team performed tremendously. I want to thank the flight control team, our engineering team, and our European partners, our Lockheed contractors, who worked tirelessly to make these burns happen and monitor spacecraft as we get into this distant retrograde orbit. It was really an important phase of our mission. It got us into a point where I feel really good getting to this part of the mission, and a really opportunity to, I would say, catch our breath a little bit and do a very important orbit around the moon and being able to do some tests and demonstration of additional capabilities for the spacecraft. Of course, you know, you've heard from Mike and Rick that the spacecraft is operating just tremendously well so far, and we're really happy with its performance overall across all the subsystem areas. And we've been able to accomplish other what we call detailed flight test objectives as well as we've gone along the mission, and we're going to try to accomplish some more in this DRO orbit. And I think it's a testament to not only the spacecraft capabilities and the performance so far of the spacecraft, but also the team. The team has been doing a great job not only monitoring our spacecraft and looking at some of the funnies and making sure it's performing as expected, but also looking at opportunities to further along test this very important mission and the spacecraft that we have to further future missions and buy down future risks as we put crew on board. And I think that's a great opportunity that we have today in the DRO. I would say that also, I mentioned last time we were here, our performance across the board continues to be outstanding relative to power we're generating, continue to generate 20% more power than we really need. We still have tremendous amount of propulsive capability or reserves in the prop tanks, excuse me. And we certainly are looking at other performance measurements across the board, across the spacecraft, and those are all going very well. So really happy where we are halfway through the mission, looking forward to completing this part of the phase and getting our spacecraft home safely. So thank you, Leah.
Thank you, Howard, and thank you again to all of our briefers who have joined today. We will now move into the question and answer portion of our session. So a reminder, if you're online, please use the *1 to raise your hand if you have a question to ask, and *2 if your question has been answered. We will start here in the room.
Thank you, Mark Carreau with Aviation Week and Space Technology. I know I'm leaning forward a little bit, but I'm wondering if you've received enough significant data from this mission so far that you can maybe update your planning dates for Artemis 2 and 3, even, you know, an estimate or a season or a month or a year? Or...
Do you want me to start with that one, Howard? And you can...
Yeah, and I'll follow.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Mark. We are starting to look at the Artemis 2 dates. We know that we need to refly some of the components from the Artemis 1 vehicle on the Artemis 2 vehicle, and we're looking at the detailed schedules there. It's a little bit early to say exactly what those are, but we did talk today in the mission management team about how the avionics boxes are performing that we plan to refly, and they are performing very well. I don't know, Howard, if you have anything to add on that.
Yeah, I would say that to add on what Mike's saying, you know, I think it's really good that you know, we're looking at and getting all this data, especially with the avionics boxes we need for Artemis 2 from Artemis 1. So we'll be making sure those get off the vehicle when we splash down safely and get the Artemis 1 crew module back. That will go into our Artemis 2 spacecraft. For Artemis 2, we're also right now in the flow, so we're working very hard to go as fast as we can And we're learning a lot from our obvious Artemis 1 flow, and we'll incorporate those lessons learned into our Artemis 2. We still have a lot of testing ahead with Artemis 2 spacecraft, both the crew module and the service module that we need to accomplish. And I think after this mission, as the boxes come back from Artemis 1 and put on board Artemis 2, at the agency level, we'll be reviewing all our schedules across the board and stitching those together. So that's where we stand today.
Yeah, and Mark, the only other point that I would add is, if you come back to our priority 3 objective, which is retrieve the spacecraft for programmatic cost savings and avionics reuse, that is baked into that retrieve the spacecraft objective. We had to work our way through a number of challenges just to get to launch, and we had a variable mission duration. And we couldn't anchor the schedule activities until we got through the hydrogen leak challenges that we had, and the hurricane, and a whole host of other things. And then the launch date anchored which class of mission we were flying, and we are on a short class mission, a 26-day mission. So we're taking that into consideration now, and we're starting to work that into our schedules.
Thank you. And just before we go to additional questions, a couple of things I wanted to note. Administrator Nelson and Center Director Vanessa Weich won't be able to join us for the question and answer portion. And then just a reminder to our media to please state your name and affiliation and to whom your question is addressed. So with that, back to the room.
Thanks very much. Eric Berger with Ars Technica. 2 questions. First of all, for Mike, I think you talked about priority 1 objectives, and I'm just curious how much of the overall risk at this point you've retired. You've gone through launch, obviously. MMOD is looking pretty good, or was as of the last briefing. The 3 different classes of thrusters on Orion seem to be performing pretty well. So, landing is kind of the main objective left. So is that 50% of the risk, 75, 25? Just trying to get a sense of where your primary concerns are in terms of sort of overall risks retired. And Howard, there was a blog post about a loss of comms several days ago with Orion. I'm just wondering what the resolution of that issue was, and if that's something to be concerned about going forward.
Okay, I'll start, Howard, and you want to follow up on the blog post?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
So again, thank you for the question, Eric. In terms of risk that's retired, we did talk pre-flight about the Pareto chart, which identifies our top risk drivers. Certainly, micrometeoroid and orbital debris, which is our top risk driver, is in play until we get out of the space environment. But being halfway through the mission puts us roughly halfway through that risk, because it is a function or a byproduct of how long we're in the spaceflight environment. We had other risks associated with first-time flight of the rocket and the overall system performance of the rocket, the integrated avionics and software risk, and RS-25 engine. All of those have been retired. We have a demonstrated rocket. In terms of the spacecraft, some of those have been bought down, but some of them are not going to be retired from a mission standpoint until we get to landing day, specifically the parachute and parachute deploy system, and then the heat shield. So that, again, comes back to our priority 1 objective. The rest of the risk drivers that come to mind, we certainly have done a much better job of characterizing the overall system performance, and I think we are buying down some of that. So that's kind of a, if you're looking at our top 10 risk drivers, some of them have been retired, some of them are still in play, and some of them won't be realized for good or bad until we get to entry, descent, and splashdown day. And I'll turn it over to Howard for the blog question.
Yeah, Eric, I'm not sure specifically which comm outage you're referring to, but I'm going to ask Rick to talk about, we've had some ground comm issues, not on board, but I'll let Rick go first.
Yeah, so if it's the one I believe you're thinking about, in order to make sure we get enable comm from the vehicle, flight controller and mission control Inco has to send a command to get the onboard comm system configured, and then the ground controller, also flight control position and mission control, coordinates with the Deep Space Network engineers, gives them what the configuration of the vehicles can be. Then they actually load the parameters to configure their network to support it. So it's complex. and we've changed things since the beginning of the mission, is to give us more capability, open the bandwidth. So we've added 2 more modes. They're based on data rates, and then we go uncoded, which then doubles our bandwidth. So we're not using a coding scheme to improve our signal-to-noise ratio, which allows us to actually bring down more data. Do that streaming. When we started streaming the video, it was because we were able to open the bandwidth, which allows us to do file transfers, bring the data off the vehicle, and also do the streaming video. Well, it was simply a misconfiguration at the Deep Space Network, where they were set up for a data rate that the vehicle was not set up for, and it just going through the troubleshooting process, finally figured that out, and then we recovered. Once we got the right data rate, we recovered the return link.
Yeah, and Eric, just to add a little clarity on this one, as I understand it, Rick, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, we need the spacecraft data rate, the Deep Space Network ground site data rate, and the MCC data rate all to be in the same configuration, and we got out of configuration with those just due to kind of some ground-to-ground coordination. Did I get that right?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Okay. Next question is on the phone with Marcia Dunn.
Hi, good evening. A couple of questions, probably for Mike or Howard. How many avionics boxes are you going to be taking from Artemis 1 from this Orion put on the next one? And what else is being shared that will be removed from the spacecraft for the next mission, no matter how small or insignificant it might seem? And then secondly, for Splashdown Day, how many people and craft do you expect to be part of the recovery effort? How many people and how many ships, planes, helicopters? I'm just looking for a big picture. Thanks.
Yeah, maybe Mike, I'll take the first one, if you can take the second one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Marcia, thanks for the question. Right now, we're looking at 8 avionics boxes across the board from Artemis 1 to bring from the Artemis 1 spacecraft and Artemis 2. Let's see, I think your other question, and maybe you can repeat the second half of your question if I don't get it exactly right, has to do with, can you repeat that one more time? You wanted additional information on what else is, I think, what else we're bringing forward that's not avionics boxes, is that correct?
That's correct. What other pieces are you going to be pulling out for Artemis 2?
Yeah, we are. I think Administrator Nelson mentioned Munich and Campos. Munich and Campos sits on a Orion seat, and so we will be using that seat for Artemis 2 as well. That's a non-avionics system that we would be utilizing on Artemis 2, but nothing else from the spacecraft on Artemis 1 that we would be reusing besides those items I mentioned.
And Marcia, thank you for the question on the recovery operation. And our recovery operations lead, Melissa Jones, is not on this call, so you might want to confirm some of this with her at a later time. But the ship, we have a well-deck ship that is provided via partnership with the U.S. Navy out of Naval Base San Diego. We will put about 85 NASA and industry partner personnel on the ship to support that operation, and that is above and beyond the ship's standard complement, which is a couple of hundred sailors. We will have deployed from the recovery ship itself at least 4 small boats, what they call small boats. 2 of those will be what they call rigid hull inflatable boats, and then 2 of those will be kind of smaller rafts. And then we'll have 2 helicopters deployed from the flight deck, one to support some of the imagery observations associated with the parachute deploy and splashdown, and another one to support locating the objects that are jettisoned from the spacecraft as it descends, things like the forward bay cover and some of the parachutes as part of the parachute deployment sequence. And then we'll have at least 1 aircraft at a higher altitude capturing imagery. So that's kind of a broad picture of it. We can get you more details at a later time.
Okay, next up we have David Curley with Discovery Channel. And David, if you're speaking.
Sorry about that. I was having a little trouble. Can you hear me now?
Loud and clear.
I guess this is for Howard. Quick question. What kind of data are you getting from inside the capsule in the environment the astronauts would be in? Specifically, are the temperatures right? What are you seeing so far inside?
Yeah, right now, good question. Right now, we are getting temperature readings. We're getting, obviously, pressure readings as well inside the cabin, and everything's nominal as we expected. Certainly, what was loaded or what was in the atmosphere when we closed the hatch is what we've got, and our leakage rates are really low. I think it's like 0.03 per day or something like that, PSI per day. So we're really understanding not only just what's inside the cabin, but obviously a lot of measurements we have inside the cabin relative to Munich and Campos. The radiation sensors are all being recorded, so we won't get that data from the cabin until we get back on the ground.
Next question is from Bill Harwood.
Hey, thanks. I got two quick ones, one for Mike and one for Howard, I think. Is the Star Tracker issue you've mentioned a couple of times, is that the most significant problem you've had with Orion? Or is there anything else that's provide worry, or maybe not worry, but required a similar level of troubleshooting? And I wasn't clear how you resolved that, or if you just decided that's just the way they operate and we understand how it works now and that makes it okay, or if there's something you had to do about that. And Howard, can you tell us what those 8 boxes are? I know it's probably buried in the press kit somewhere, but I can't remember what the avionics boxes are that you're going to take off Artemis 1 and put on Artemis 2. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, hey, Mike, let me, maybe I'll address both questions, if you don't mind, and you can add to it. I think with the Star Tracker, it's certainly the highest visibility. When we first, we had a couple issues where we took, I think, a radiation hit on the Star Tracker itself, and we also had this issue with a bit flip relative RAM where inside the box itself, it has error detection correction automatically. And I think I mentioned in the last press conference, it does when you have a radiation hit, it may flip a bit in the memory, it auto corrects itself, and it just tells you. And it's a very, very good system that is on a lot of deep space kinds of hardware, avionics hardware. And in this case, when it first tripped, we were getting indications that Star Tracker wasn't performing. And I think through our analysis and, of course, very detailed look at all the data that we got at that time, we made some decisions, obviously, to press forward. But it turned out that the Star Tracker was working just beautifully. It was outputting navigation data as expected. This bit trip, we found out through our our last few days, several days of hard work by the team, is that this is very anomalous behavior. Many of the Star Trackers in deep space and even geosynchronous satellites and low Earth orbit satellites have data that shows that they take these kinds of RAM upsets, and so they get auto-corrected and they log it. And so today, when we went to the MMT, we walked through all the data. We showed a lot of detailed in terms of not only from our own program, but from other programs that the Europeans have flown, from other programs that we know about from our sister programs, to learn what they've seen, and the data corroborates what we hypothesized to be. And I think that turned out really well in terms of the Star Tracker performance and understanding what happened with the Star Tracker. So I'll pause there, see if Mike wants to add anything to that before I answer the next question.
Yeah, Bill, thank you for the question. Howard said it well. The team did a very thorough analysis of the Star Tracker random access memory bits that were being set. And this is a case where leveraging our industrial base and other missions out there, whether they're NASA missions or other missions that use this common set of avionics or very similar design to it, is helping us, and we tap that expertise. In terms of other issues that are out there, we do have one active anomaly resolution team associated with the power conditioning and distribution unit on something called the latching current limiter. It is apparently being uncommanded open, so for some reason these latching current limiters on umbilical 1, uniquely on umbilical 1, there have been a number of occurrences that are being nobody's on the ground commanding these things open. So we're trying to characterize that and understand what the hardware is telling us, and that active anomaly resolution team is working in the background. It is not a high-level concern because we have appropriate levels of redundancy. There's 4 solar array wings, 2 of these per channel, per power channel, and we're recovering from these. We just don't quite understand what the hardware is telling us, and we're expecting an outbrief from that anomaly resolution team in the next couple of days. The other things that are out there, we've talked previously about the coolant loop 1 flow rate being erratic. We believe that there's gas in the fluid, and we're periodically seeing the flow rate drop, and then it comes back up as the gas bubble moves its way through the coolant loop. We also had what I would argue was a gift handed to us from the flight environment. We had the flight control module number 1 had a reset. And that was due to a radiation hit, and it did exactly what it was designed to do. And we have a feature called the cross-channel reset, and the system recovered by itself, and it handled the radiation hit as it was designed. So we're again characterizing the system performance. We're learning from it. We're learning what the hardware is telling us. Some of this is unfamiliar to us in the flight environment, and we're rolling that into all the operations. So I don't know, Rick, if you have anything to add to that.
No, you've covered it well. That cross-channel restart essentially is when a computer goes down and comes back up, it gathers information from the other computers to basically get right back to where it was and get back into a sync with all the other 3 computers. Work just as it's designed.
And I'll answer the last question, or the second question. So we're returning the Orion IMUs, or inertial measuring units, the GPSRs, which is the receivers for GPS, and then the phase array antennas. So that's the list of items that we are using from Artemis 1 and putting on board Artemis 2.
All right, thank you all. The next question comes from Isam Ahmed.
Thanks for doing this. For Mike Sarpin, will we see the Apollo landing sites on the next lunar flyby, and which ones? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Hassan. Rick's probably better in tune with that one, but as I understand it, we will get to see multiple Apollo landing sites.
Yeah,
Rick,
we do believe there's a team that's actually actively making the plan, putting the plan together to support the imagery as we fly by the moon. The positive is on the return powered flyby, that area will be lit, so we have the opportunity. We just got to get the vehicle in the right orientation and get the cameras going. We're going to be taking imagery, so and I don't know exactly which sites, but I know on the outbound powered flyby there was 4 sites that were all in the dark, so we didn't capture them. But my expectation is the same 4 will be available this time with the proper lighting conditions.
We're looking forward to it. Up next on the phone, we have Tim Fernholz.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking this question. 2 things I was wondering. One, can you talk a little bit more about the 2 flight rule waivers you need to do for the additional objectives and what that looks like? And then second, just thinking about the Deep Space Network, now that you're using it with Artemis and sort of breaking in those procedures, are there thoughts about what might be necessary to improve or invest in or add to the DSN system ahead of crewed flight with Artemis? Thank you.
Yeah, Tim, thank you for the question. I'll talk about the flight rule waivers here up front. But in terms of the accomplishing what we're calling characterizing the thermal envelope, Orion is, by design, it wants to fly tail to sun. That is for thermal stability of the vehicle, but also from a power production standpoint. And the vehicle, through analysis, is allowed to go up to 20 degrees in either pitch or yaw out of that perfect tail to sun orientation. So what we're doing is we're characterizing the corners of the box, 20 degrees, and doing that. And there's also a thermal recovery time required, as Rick had mentioned earlier, about if we're out of attitude greater than that 20 degrees for more than 3 hours, we have to do a 10-hour tail to sun thermal recovery period before we're allowed to use the orbital maneuvering system. So the waiver was specific to the thermal analysis requirements and the desire to gather some of the data on that thermal envelope expansion, and that is consistent with a test flight. We want to do envelope expansion and validate our models. I don't know, Rick, if you have anything to add on the flight rule waivers.
No, you covered it. Okay. Well, that was for the first one. I think the second one, you going to cover that one?
I'm trying to remember.
It's the second one was for the solar array positioning constraints, yes. Right? We for the various burns that we do with Orion, we have specific attitudes or positioning that we put the solar array wings, and that's to prevent damage from plume impingement from the reaction control thrusters. And for this 100-second plus X test, we want to put the position of the arrays different than what had been previously analyzed and was considered approved, and that's why we're waiving. And this is to gain the data that we want. That's specifically why we're doing the test. So that's the rationale for that waiver.
Yeah, and thank you for the reminder. So that the specific constraint that we're trying to avoid is not a plume impingement or a load constraint on the solar array wing. It has to do with the radiant heating from the engine that's in proximity to the solar array wing. So those were the two waivers that were approved, and they are specific to these test conditions and specific to the objectives that were set up. These are not just what I'll call generic waivers for operations across the mission, and we did make that clear today.
Hey, Mike, would you mind? I'll jump in with a couple fine points relative to that. From a spacecraft perspective, Mike talks about the 20-20-20 degree envelope. I mean, we've already analyzed this as pre-mission. We know that we can operate in these regimes. There were some flight rule constraints relative to the two pieces, the OMZ or the main engine, and then also the star tracker was also. So I think from an overall risk perspective, that's why we talked about pressing forward with this particular objective, is because we feel like through our pre-mission analysis that we're able to operate in those boundaries. We just want to make sure in this real flight environment that we get to those corners of the boxes. So that's one piece, and that's the same for the arrays. The arrays, we've tested and certified them to be in these configurations, although we didn't nominally want to operate them in that because of what we needed to do for the mission. But now as we do the flight test objectives, there's no risk with the hardware in terms of where we want to park these arrays for this test. So I just want to make sure that was clear, Mike.
Yeah, thank you for that, Howard. Mm-hmm. And then Tim, you had a second part to your question. I'm forgetting the second part.
No worries. Thank you for the detailed explanation. I was just asking about, given sort of the work through of the process with the Deep Space Network, is there any thought to investing in, further capabilities or improving that network ahead of crewed flight when it may be more important to get that communications done quickly?
Yes, Tim. The answer is yes. We are very mindful that the Deep Space Network has many customers, and Artemis is one of those. But there are many science missions out there. There are many space technology missions and other partnership missions out there. So as we expand the portfolio of Artemis capabilities, whether it's Gateway or the Human Landing System, and some of the surface operations and surface systems, as we get further into the manifest, we are acutely aware that we need to improve the communications and tracking and navigation assets out there. So we do have additional investments planned in the Deep Space Network. I don't want to get ahead of that because there's probably a procurement that's in play ahead of us on that.
Okay, next question is from Kristen Fisher with CNN.
everyone. This question is for Senator Nelson, if he's still on. If not, I guess, Mike, it might be for you. But given the fact that this mission, Artemis 1, is going so well, wondering if we could get an update on when a crew may be announced for Artemis 2. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, Kristen. Thank you for the question. We've purposefully deferred that decision until after Artemis 1 is successfully complete. We want to get through a demonstration of our human transportation system before we name a crew for a number of reasons. One is just time between missions. We need to understand the time between Artemis 1 and 2. It is possible to be in training too long. And we need to find the sweet spot relative to the training time for the crew. But once a crew is named, they're going to be highly sought after people, and there are other responsibilities for astronauts in the astronaut office, and we need to keep that in mind as well from a workload and just kind of an overall flight crew availability standpoint, and their time is precious, so we've purposely deferred that until after Artemis 1. I don't have a specific date for you, but it will be after the mission.
Thank you. And our next question is from Jem Siegel.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for taking my question today. What will be the approximate length of the Artemis 2 mission? And secondly, roughly how many NASA and partner people are involved in monitoring Artemis 1? Thank you.
Okay. I'll take the mission length, Rick, and you want to take the team, and Howard, you want to talk about the size of your teams? Jim, in terms of the mission length for Artemis 2, we're looking at a 10.5-day crewed flight test. So 4 astronauts will fly a 1-day highly elliptical orbit to basically shake down the life support system and perform a proximity operations demonstration with the upper stage before it is separated at a far distance from Orion. And then at the end of that 1-day high Earth orbit, Orion will essentially perform a mission completion maneuver and use the service module to perform the translunar injection maneuver and put itself on a free return trajectory about 4.5 days out and about 4.5 days back. So it'll be a little over 10 days, and that's our Artemis 2 plan. So, Rick, do you want to talk about your team, and Howard, do you want to talk about your teams as well?
Sure. So it's a little hard, but in the front room we have 10 flight controllers, and then for each one of those they have either one, some have up to two support personnel in the multi-purpose support room, and then we have 3 shifts. So there you're looking at on the for the flight control team specific, we're looking at on the order of 60. That doesn't include, the ground controller who has responsibilities for making sure the facilities are configured properly. There's quite a few of those people, and I couldn't give you a number, but I'm guessing probably another 5, so 15. So we're looking around 75 people inside MCC. It's a pretty close number. And then let Howard talk to the mission evaluation room.
Yeah, that's a good question, but a tough question. I think same with Rick. I would estimate maybe 10 consoles in the mission evaluation room, which is the support from an engineering perspective. Probably a couple people on console per 3 shifts across a day. And so you're looking at maybe 60-ish people. And then we've got some support from Europe as well. They've got some people supporting from an engineering perspective. We've also got people at the Lockheed Martin facility in Denver. So probably, somewhere in that 70 to 100, somewhere around there, depending on the day and the burn. We probably bring more engineering support as needed for the bigger burns. And then, of course, as we have issues, we'll bring more people to look at these issues and try to resolve them quickly. So it varies depending on the day. But somewhere around there, probably similar to what Rick's got across the board.
Yeah, and then Jim, from the mission management team standpoint, for day of launch, because we had the propulsive elements associated with the Space Launch System, we had 24 mission management team members. We've collapsed that down since then to about 14 because the rocket has largely done its job, but we do include the Space Launch System program management team in that. And then on day of launch, the SLS Engineering Support Center out of Huntsville, which is their technical reach back, had roughly 110 people supporting, and that team has largely been sunset since we've gotten through the point of translunar injection.
Okay, we have time for just a couple of more questions. This one is from Elisha Sars.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. This also would have been for Administrator Nelson. I know Kristen sort of asked along the same lines of what I'm going to ask, but at the top of the call, Mr. Nelson had said that the astronauts in the Artemis 3 lander will be, quote, the first woman and the next man, end quote, on the moon. And I may be way overanalyzing this, but is that slight departure in his phrasing significant? Because before now it seemed possible that there could be 2 women astronauts landing on the moon. And I'm just wondering if he misspoke, or is that comment an indication that decisions have been made? Because I know you said that the crew hasn't been announced publicly yet, but have they been decided already internally?
Yeah. Elisha, thank you for the question. I'm not going to get ahead of that one. We'll just have to wait and see what the decision is and who is on that crew.
Okay, and our last question for this afternoon is from Robert Perlman.
Hi, thanks. A question and a quick follow-up to a previous question, I think both for Rick. There was mention recently in NASA's update about Callisto being fired up, and we saw a video of, I guess, the disco or party mode. But I was wondering from a mission control perspective, as you've seen it being used, how effective of a tool is it to have the ability to query an AI aboard an uncrewed spacecraft, looking ahead to the day that maybe all 4 Orion astronauts go down to the surface and not just 2? And then just as a quick update, when you were mentioning the Apollo sites, can you just clarify in terms of the resolution that the public should expect? That are you going to be able to resolve features at the landing sites, or are you just photographing Tranquility Base or Frau Mora, and it's just the general area? Thanks.
Sure. With respect to the CIT, the Crew Interface Technology payload, I personally think it'll be very advantageous for the crews, probably more so when we actually leave Gateway and start going deeper into space, where the time delay between us and the ground and the crew, it's going to be problematic for us to be able to do things real time. And if they have a device on board that can answer a lot of their questions based on a database that they have, that seems like something that would be beneficial to the crew. As far as the way it's set up for Artemis 1, the flight control team, really, we're just activating the equipment and scheduling the services at the Deep Space Network. We got to schedule a specific antenna, and then make sure it's configured properly to support the event. But as far as of all the other stuff that's going on, we're just kind of enjoying the imagery just like you guys are, but not really actively participating. I know Howard probably can give you a little bit of insight because he's participating in a couple of the events, so he can give you his perspective. I'll pause a second and see if you want to add anything there.
Yeah, I think part of this is a demonstration of the technology and really operating in the environment of where we want to be in terms of lunar orbit. And so I think we're getting really good, results. And I think it's been a good collection of data so far. And the engagement has, I think, gone very well, and appreciate Rick and the flight control team helping make that possible. I think it takes some effort to do the scheduling and coordination, and I think everybody that's participated in it has seen the value, as Rick has alluded to. And I think as time will tell in terms of what is needed, I think the demands of what the crew requires to support and operate the spacecraft and execute the mission will determine the capabilities we need. And I think these are all good things that we're planting the seeds for. and allowing us to reap those when it's time.
And as far as your second question, as far as what the expectations are for the quality of the imagery of the lunar or the Apollo sites as we fly by, there's a team working it. So I don't really have a good answer for you, but I will tell you that just the imagery that you saw of the moon surface as we went by, some of that was from our optical navigation camera. We use the solar array wings that have the cameras at the end. We're not really going to be tracking specific ground sites as we fly over. That's would be asking a bit, and you run the risk of not getting anything if you try to over-engineer it. So it'll be comparable to what you saw as we went by for the outbound powered flyby. So I apologize, but I can't give you better information than that.
All right. Thank you all who tuned in and asked questions, and thank you also to our briefers today, as well as Administrator Nelson and NASA Center Director Vanessa White here at the Johnson Space Center. A quick look ahead at some things we have coming up. We have the distant retrograde departure burn coming up this Thursday, December 1st, but ahead of that, we're going to preview with another briefing on Wednesday at 4 p.m. Central Time. Don't forget, you can also watch live views from Orion almost any time that we have signal from the spacecraft at go.nasa.gov/Artemis Live. Some amazing views that we've had so far today, so make sure to tune in and see those. You can also read our daily blog updates at nasa.gov or at blogs.nasa.gov/Artemis. And of course, don't forget, you can see the latest imagery and videos on our Flickr account at flickr.com/photos/NASA2Explore. That'll wrap it up for us here today at Johnson Space Center. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you again soon.